The hospital smelled of antiseptic and quiet fear. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my hands clenched together. My world had tilted on its axis just a few hours ago. A phone call, a screech of tires replaying in my mind. And then this bright, sterile room where Maya lay. Her eyes were open, which should have been a relief, but when she looked at me, there was nothing there. No recognition, no spark of the love that had defined my life for 3 years. The doctor, a kind man with weary eyes, had used the word amnesia. He said the impact from the car accident had been severe. He explained that her memories might be jumbled, or worse, completely gone. I just stared at him, the word echoing in the silent space between us, amnesia. It felt like a word from a dramatic film, not something that could happen to us, to Maya and me. I tried to be strong. I walked over to her bed, my heart pounding a heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. "Maya," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's me, it's Leo." She just blinked, her expression a blank canvas where our shared history should have been painted. I reached for her hand, the one I had held 1,000 times. It felt limp in mine, a stranger's hand. I talked about our first date, the little coffee shop where we'd laughed for hours. I mentioned the silly nicknames we had for each other. I described the small apartment we had filled with so much love and cheap furniture. Each memory I offered was like a stone tossed into a deep, still well, disappearing without a ripple. She simply watched me, a polite but distant curiosity in her eyes. It was like speaking to a ghost in the shell of the woman I loved. The doctors told me to be patient. They said memories could return slowly, or all at once. They gave me pamphlets on brain injuries and recovery. I read every single one, searching for a map to bring her back to me. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that our love was strong enough to break through this fog. It had to be. Our love was the sun, the moon, the very air I breathed. How could she forget the way we danced in the kitchen to no music? How could she forget the promises we whispered to each other in the dead of night? I told myself this was just a temporary detour, a cruel test we had to pass. I would be her anchor. I would be her memory, until her own returned. Leaving her that first night was the hardest thing I had ever done. The hallway seemed to stretch for miles, each step taking me further from her. The world outside the hospital doors felt wrong, muted. The city lights were too bright, the sounds of traffic too loud. Everything was just noise without her beside me, without her hand in mine. I went back to our empty apartment and the silence was deafening. Her scent lingered on the pillows. Her favorite mug was still by the sink. It was a home built for two, now occupied by 1.5. Me and the ghost of our shared past. I swore to myself in that quiet darkness that I would not give up. I would fight for her. I would fight for us. I would bring my Maya back, no matter what it took. The days that followed blurred into a painful routine. I would wake up early, gather things that I hoped would trigger a memory, and head to the hospital. I brought her favorite books, the ones with the corners of the pages folded down. I played her the songs from the playlist I had made for our first anniversary. I even brought in photos, dozens of them, pictures of us smiling on a beach, of her blowing out birthday candles, of us bundled in scarves during a winter walk. She would look at them politely, a small sad smile on her lips. "We look happy," she would say, as if she were commenting on a photograph of complete strangers. Her detachment was a sharp physical pain in my chest. It was a constant reminder that the woman I loved was lost somewhere, and I didn't know how to find her. I spent every moment I could by her side, retelling our stories. I talked about the time we got caught in the rain, and took shelter under a shop awning, laughing so hard we couldn't breathe. I reminded her of the stray cat we had rescued, the one she named Noodle because of his wobbly legs. I described the future we had planned, the little house with the blue door we dreamed of buying. I was her narrator, the keeper of our shared timeline. But it felt like I was reading a beautiful story to someone who couldn't understand the language. She would listen patiently, sometimes even ask a question, but her eyes remained empty. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign that any of my words were landing on familiar ground. It was exhausting, this one-sided conversation with our past. Friends and family would visit, their faces a mixture of pity and encouragement. They would tell me to stay strong, that Maya was a fighter. They brought flowers that filled the room with a sweet, cloying scent that I started to hate. They would talk to her, sharing their own memories, but their efforts were met with the same polite confusion. After they left, I would be alone with her again, in the crushing silence of the hospital room. I started to feel a deep, gnawing loneliness, I was grieving for someone who was still alive. I was mourning a relationship that was technically still intact. It was a strange, isolating kind of pain that no one else could truly understand. I was holding on to a memory while she was living in a world without it. Despite the emotional toll, I refused to let despair take hold. I had to believe. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was all I had. I would search her face for any sign, any tiny clue that she was still in there. A twitch of a smile, a brief flash of understanding in her eyes. I celebrated the small victories. One day she remembered she didn't like coffee with sugar, a detail so small it felt monumental. I held on to that moment for days, replaying it in my mind. It was proof, I told myself. It was a crack in the wall of her amnesia. The real Maya was still there, fighting her way back to me. I just had to be patient and keep trying. I had to believe that love was a powerful enough force to heal even a broken mind. Weeks turned into a month and Maya was finally discharged from the hospital. Bringing her back to our apartment was both a blessing and a new kind of torture. I thought being in our shared space would be the key, the final push her memory needed. I had cleaned everything, arranged it all just so. I put her favorite blanket on the sofa and filled a vase with the daisies she loved. When she walked through the door, she looked around with the cautious curiosity of a guest, not the comfortable familiarity of someone returning home. "It's a nice place," she said, her voice soft. The words were a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a nice place, it was our home, our sanctuary. Every object held a story, a piece of us, and she couldn't see any of it. I tried to create new routines, hoping they would merge with the old ones. We would take walks in the park where we had our first kiss. I would cook her the pasta dish that I had made on our second date. I did everything I could to fill our days with echoes of the past. Sometimes I would see a glimmer of the old Maya, a laugh that sounded just right, a particular way she tilted her head when she was thinking. These moments were like tiny sparks in a vast darkness, and I would rush toward them, fanning the flames with my hope. I thought, maybe this is how it works. Not a sudden flood of memories, but a slow, gentle trickle. I just had to keep the water flowing. There were good days. Days when she would ask questions about our past, showing a genuine interest. "Tell me again about that trip to the mountains," she would say. And I would, my voice filled with renewed energy, painting the picture for her with my words. I would describe the crisp air, the color of the leaves, the feeling of her hand in mine as we reached the summit. On those days, I felt like we were making progress, like we were rebuilding our connection, brick by brick. I allowed myself to dream again. I imagined a future where this was all just a painful chapter in our long love story, a story we would one day tell our grandchildren. The hope was intoxicating, a warm balm on my weary soul, but the good days were always followed by the bad. Days when she would retreat into herself, a wall of glass descending between us. She would seem distant, frustrated. She started spending more time on her phone, texting people I didn't know. When I asked, she would say they were new friends, people who didn't have expectations of her, who didn't look at her with sad, hopeful eyes. It hurt, but I tried to understand. I told myself it was part of her recovery, her need to build a new identity when her old one was missing. I gave her space, believing that pushing her would only drive her further away. I didn't realize that she wasn't running from her past. She was building a new life right in front of me, one that didn't include us. The discovery came on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, filled with my quiet efforts and her polite distance. I had gone to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription for her. On my way back, I decided to surprise her with lunch from her favorite little cafe. I walked into our apartment building, my heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. I was holding on to the memory of her smile from the morning, a rare and beautiful thing. As I stepped out of the elevator, I heard laughter coming from the end of the hall, near our door. It was Maya's laugh. The sound was so full and genuine that it stopped me in my tracks. It was the carefree laugh I hadn't heard since before the accident. For a second, my heart soared. Maybe she was better. Maybe she remembered. But then I heard a man's voice, low and intimate. I crept closer, my footsteps silent on the carpeted hallway. The door to our apartment was slightly ajar. I peered through the narrow opening, my body frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I saw her standing there, her back to me. She was talking to a man I had never seen before. He was tall, with dark hair, and he was smiling at her in a way that was far too familiar. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek, it was a long, lingering kiss, full of passion and intimacy. Maya didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her hands resting on his chest. I watched, paralyzed by a cold, creeping horror. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way she looked at him. Her eyes were sparkling, alive with an emotion I hadn't seen directed at me in months. It was recognition, it was affection, it was love. In that single sickening moment, the world tilted on its axis again, but this time, it wasn't confusion or fear that filled me. It was a sudden blinding clarity. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a horrifying sound. Her distance, her frustration, the endless texting with new friends, the way she never quite met my eyes. It wasn't amnesia, it was a lie, a monstrous, calculated lie. I stumbled back from the door, my lunch bag slipping from my grasp and hitting the floor with a soft thud. I couldn't breathe. The air in the hallway was thick and suffocating. The entire foundation of my world, the hope I had so carefully nurtured, had been a lie. She hadn't forgotten me. She hadn't lost our past. She had discarded it. She had thrown it away for the freedom to be with someone else, using her amnesia as a shield. The pain was unlike anything I had ever felt. It was a physical ache that started in my chest and radiated through my entire body, leaving me cold and numb. She hadn't just forgotten our love, she had betrayed it in the cruelest way imaginable. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. My legs felt like lead as I turned and walked back to the elevator, my mind a swirling vortex of pain and disbelief. I went to a park, the same one where I had tried to jog her memory, and sat on a bench. The world moved on around me. Children laughed, dogs chased squirrels, couples walked hand in hand, but I was in a bubble of silent agony. Every memory of the past few months replayed in my head, now tainted by the ugly truth. Every time I had retold a story, every photo I had shown her, every hopeful tear I had shed, it was all a performance for her. I had been the fool in a play she had written, and well, I hadn't even known I was on stage. The humiliation was as sharp as the betrayal. The hope I had clung to so desperately now felt like a sickness. It had been a poison I had willingly fed myself, all while she was living a double life. I thought about her polite smiles, her feigned confusion. How much effort must it have taken to keep up such a charade, to look me in the eyes day after day, listening to me pour my heart out, all while knowing it was a lie. The coldness of it was what truly broke me. It wasn't a simple case of falling out of love. It was a deliberate, sustained act of cruelty. She had used my love for her as a tool for her own deception. She had weaponized my devotion. The trust I had placed in her, the very core of our relationship, was not just broken, it had been methodically dismantled. I sat on that bench until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass. The vibrant colors of the sky were a stark contrast to the gray emptiness inside me. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything that mattered. The love I had felt for Maya, which had been the central pillar of my life, had curdled into something bitter and unrecognizable. It was a grief more profound than if she had truly died in that accident. In death, our love would have remained pure, a perfect memory. But this betrayal, had corrupted everything. It had poisoned not just the present but the past as well. I questioned every memory, every I love you, every shared smile. Was any of it ever real? When I finally went back to the apartment, it was late. She was there, watching television as if nothing had happened. She looked up and gave me that same practiced, distant smile. "You're late," she said. I was getting worried. The lie was so effortless, so natural that it made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't speak. I just looked at her, seeing her for the first time, not as the woman I loved, or the patient I needed to care for, but as a stranger. A manipulative stranger who had shattered my heart without a second thought. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her into our bedroom and closed the door, the sound echoing the final, definitive closing of a chapter in my life. The love was gone. All that was left was the wreckage. The days that followed were a quiet hell. I lived in the same apartment as her, but we were worlds apart. I stopped trying to help her remember. I stopped telling our stories. I moved into the spare room, creating a physical boundary to match the emotional chasm that had opened between us. I spoke to her only when necessary, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. She seemed confused by my sudden withdrawal. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me with a questioning expression, as if she couldn't understand why I'd given up. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She was the architect of this ruin, and yet she looked at me as if I were the one who had changed. During this time I found myself talking more to my parents. They had been worried about me for months, watching me pour all my energy into Maya's recovery. I never told them the full truth of her betrayal. The shame was just too great. But I spoke to them about my sadness, my exhaustion. My mother, in her gentle way, brought up a topic they had mentioned in passing before, an arranged marriage. In our culture, it wasn't an uncommon path. They knew a family with a daughter named Angeli. They said she was kind and gentle and ready to build a life with someone. Before, I would have dismissed the idea instantly. My heart belonged to Maya, but now, my heart was a barren wasteland. The idea of an arranged marriage, which once seemed so foreign and unappealing, now offered a strange kind of comfort. It was a path chosen not by a fickle heart but by family, by tradition, by a desire for stability. It promised a different kind of love, one that was not built on a whirlwind romance but on shared values, respect, and a quiet commitment to grow together. It felt safe. It felt like a way to move forward without having to risk the kind of devastating heartbreak I had just endured. I was too broken to trust my own judgment, to trust in passionate love. Perhaps a love that was carefully built, instead of passionately found, was what I needed. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. One evening, after another silent dinner where Maya spent the whole time texting, I called my mother. "Tell me more about her," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me about Angeli." My mother's surprise was evident, but it quickly turned to relief. She told me about Angeli's love for books, her work as a teacher, her calm and steady nature. As I listened, a strange sense of peace began to settle over me. It wasn't excitement or passion. It was the quiet feeling of a decision being made, a decision to leave the ruins of my past behind and walk toward a future that was unknown, but at least it was not built on a foundation of lies. I agreed. I told my parents I would meet her. I made a silent promise to myself to choose a new life. The time had come to end it. I couldn't live in the same space as her any longer, pretending that we were anything other than two strangers sharing a roof. I waited for an evening when I knew we would both be home. I found her in the living room, scrolling through her phone, a small smile on her face. My heart didn't even ache anymore, it was just numb. I stood in front of her, blocking the light from the lamp, and waited for her to look up. When she finally did, her smile faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "What is it, Leo?" she asked, her tone impatient. It was the perfect opening. "I know, Maya," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of my pain and my resolve. "I know you've been lying." Her face went pale. The phone in her hand clattered to the floor. For a moment she just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. The mask of the confused amnesiac fell away, and in its place was pure, unadulterated panic. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, but her eyes darted around the room looking for an escape. There was no escape from this. I had seen her, I knew the truth. The game was over, and there was no one left to fool. "I saw you," I continued, my voice remaining steady even as my insides twisted. "I saw you with him. In the hallway. I heard you laugh. I saw you kiss him." Her panic quickly turned to anger, a defensive fury that was ugly and raw. "So what if you did?" she spat, her voice rising. "What were you expecting? For me to just sit here forever waiting for something to come back? I needed a life, Leo. A life without you constantly looking at me with those sad puppy eyes, trying to force me to be someone I don't even know." The cruelty of her words was astounding. She tried to twist the narrative, to make me the villain for loving her too much, for caring too much. I didn't rise to the bait. I didn't yell. I just stood there and let her rage wash over me. It was the final confirmation I needed. There was no remorse, no guilt, only selfish justification. "You didn't have to lie," I said softly. "You could have just told me you didn't love me anymore. You could have just left. But you chose to be cruel. You chose to let me waste my life hoping for a miracle that you knew would never come." I looked at her, this woman I had once loved more than life itself, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity, for her and for the man I had been. "I'm leaving," I said. "I'm moving out. We're done." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone amidst the wreckage of her own lies. Packing my things was a surreal experience. Each object I touched held a memory, but the memories were now bifurcated. There was the memory from before the lie, and the memory from after. The small wooden bird she had bought me on our first anniversary, a symbol of our love, then a prop in her elaborate play. The worn-out sweater I always wore on lazy Sundays, a comfort, then a costume. I sorted through my life deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. I found I was leaving more than just physical objects. I was leaving behind the naive boy who believed love could conquer all. I was leaving behind the hope that had nearly destroyed me. It was a painful but necessary amputation. My parents were a quiet source of strength during this time. They didn't press for details about Maya, they simply saw that I was broken and needed to heal. They helped me find a new apartment, a small, clean space that held no ghosts. It was a blank canvas. The day I met Anjali, I was nervous. My heart felt like a fragile, repaired piece of pottery. I was afraid of being hurt again. We met at a quiet tea house with our parents sitting at a nearby table, giving us space. She was not like Maya. She was calm and observant, with kind eyes that held a gentle intelligence. She didn't fill the silence with chatter. She let it be, comfortable and unforced. We talked for hours, not about passion or grand romantic gestures, but about simple things. Books, family, our hopes for a quiet, meaningful life. She spoke about her students with a warmth that was genuine and touching. I found myself talking about my own work, my own interests, things that had been overshadowed for so long by my singular focus on Maya. Anjali listened. She truly listened. There was a stability to her, a sense of being grounded that I found incredibly soothing. It was like finding solid earth after being tossed in a stormy sea. There were no fireworks, no sudden jolt of electricity. Instead, there was a slow, dawning feeling of peace. Leaving the tea house that day, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in a very long time. It was a choice. I was choosing this path. I was choosing to build something new with someone who valued honesty and respect. I called my parents that night and told them I wanted to move forward with the arrangement. It wasn't a surrender. It was a conscious decision to embrace a different kind of love story. One that might not begin with a fiery explosion, but with the quiet, steady flame of two people choosing to build a life together, based on mutual kindness and a shared desire for a peaceful future. I was ready to learn a new language of love, one that was spoken in actions and trust, not in grand declarations that could so easily turn to lies. Months later, the pain of Maya's betrayal had receded. It was no longer a gaping wound but a scar that served as a reminder of my own resilience. It reminded me of what I had survived. I rarely thought of her anymore. When I did, it was with a sense of detachment, like remembering a character from a sad book I had once read. Her power over me was gone. The anger and the heartache had been replaced by a quiet indifference. I had taken back my life from the brink of her deception. I was no longer the victim in her story. I was the author of my own. My relationship with Anjali grew slowly, organically. It was built on a foundation of countless conversations, shared meals and long walks. I discovered her quiet sense of humor, her unwavering loyalty to her family, her hidden passion for gardening. She, in turn, learned to understand my silences, my need for solitude at times. She never pushed me to talk about my past, but she created a safe space where I knew I could if I ever wanted to. Her presence was a calming influence, a steady hand on my shoulder. The love that grew between us was not a storm. It was a deep, quiet river, flowing steadily toward a shared future. I found peace in the ordinary. The simple joy of cooking dinner together, the comfort of reading side by side in the evening, the easy laughter that now filled my apartment. My life was no longer a drama of high highs and devastating lows. It was a gentle rhythm, a steady heartbeat. I had once believed that love had to be a grand, all-consuming passion, but I learned that it could also be a quiet partnership, a gentle respect, a shared commitment to building a life of peace and stability. This new love didn't erase my past or my scars, but it healed them. It showed me that my heart was capable of trust and affection again. Today is July 8th, 2025. As I look out at the morning sun casting a warm glow over the city, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the pain I endured, but for the strength I discovered in its wake. The journey was heartbreaking, but it led me here. It led me to a life that is real and honest and deeply peaceful. It led me to Anjali. The future is no longer a source of anxiety but a quiet promise. I have learned that the end of one story, no matter how devastating, is always the beginning of another. And I am ready to turn the page, to embrace this new chapter with a heart that is no longer broken, but whole.